Hey guys, it's a quick video on one of our problems from our quotient rule worksheet. This is number 20. Okay, number 20 asked us what is the equation of the tangent line when x equal -1. Okay, well, we remember that m tan, let's write it the way we should write it, m tan is always h prime at whatever point we care about, which this is -1. When we get h prime of -1, let's first go get h prime of x. So h prime of x, let's see, gotta remember your quotient rule. See, this derivative of the first, so that's derivative of the first is 2f prime of x times the second, so that's times g of x, minus the first, that's 2f of x, times the derivative of the second, so that's g prime of x. Let's just not worry about number 21, we're only working with 20, all over g of x, that squared. Okay, so then making our little substitution, we care about at -1, so we have h prime, and I want you guys to show this kind of notation. H prime of -1 is 2 f prime of -1 g of times g of -1 minus 2 f of -1 g prime of -1 all over g of -1, that quantity squared. Okay. So now we can come make our substitution. So our m tan value, our tangent slope, is h prime at -1, which, making our substitutions, f prime of -1. So we're in this we care about this row here. Okay, this is the row we're looking at. So f prime of -1 is -2. So we've got 2 times -2. G of -1 is 1. I'm just following right along this row. Okay. G of -1 is 1 minus 2. F of -1 is 3. And G prime of -1 is 1. And I need to go back and get G of -1 again, which is just 1. That's all over 1 squared. Okay, so let's see, we've got -4 minus 6, so a -10 over 1, so just -10. Our tangent slope at -1 for this function will be -10. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so now that we have our tangent slope, we always just need to go get our point. We need a slope and a point, so our point 1 is going to always x and then the function value at x. So in general, it's always x. In this case, we care about h, so it's x h of x. And for us, our x is -1, so it's -1 h of -1. And let's do a little calculation. H of -1 is 2 f of -1 over g of -1. So I'm just using the definition of h. So h of -1 is 2 f of -1 again was 3. So we have 2 times 3 over g of -1, which I think is just 1. Yeah, so that's 6. Okay, so we got h of -1 is 6. M tan is -10. So we can proceed to y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And we have our points. We're going to be using point 1, which is -1 and 6. And our tangent slope, which is -10. So just using these two, we can easily go get that equation. Talk with you soon.